So no Pride Month would be complete without us talking about Stonewall 2015. It's been 10 years since that piece of movie came out, and I feel like there is a lot about the cultural context, historical context in which the movie exists that we've ignored, and now we've arrived at the epitome of pinkwashing, when the Israeli government uses queer people to justify bombing innocent people. Because if you lived there, you can't be free. They would throw you off roofs, they said, as they actively threw people off roofs. But let's get into that in a little bit. Stonewall is like the pick-me-gay of movies. Stonewall 2015 is what Colton Underwood would probably tell you happened if you asked him to describe the Stonewall Riots. And though accounts may differ, one thing we know for certain. Nobody died at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed?
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Movies like Stonewall piss me off because if I Saw the TV Glow is telling people, hey, this is how trans people feel, Stonewall 2015 is telling gays, hey, stop. We did it. We did it, Joe. Let's celebrate and throw a big pride bash. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Eric, if you didn't know. And if you did know, welcome back. So, Stonewall 2015. It's a coming-of-age story that follows this guy called Danny. He gets kicked out of his house in Kansas, and he travels to New York City, where he befriends a group of homeless sex worker youth and navigates the life of a homeless, abandoned gay person until the Stonewall Riots, which happened in 1969. Now, the riots themselves were kickstarted and spearheaded by Black and brown trans people and drag queens, along other members of the LGBTQ community. And though some accounts differ as to who threw the first brick, for the longest time people said Marsha P. Johnson, now they're not sure, one thing's for certain. It was not this white guy. It was not this all-American southern white boy who decided to show up in New York, and 2 weeks later, he had had enough. And he decided to revolt against the system. That's simply not true. So today I thought we could talk about whitewashing and pinkwashing. Pinkwashing because I am sick and tired of hearing people say that if you're queer, you should not be pro-Palestine. And whitewashing because this movie really did its best to rewrite queer history. And in my theory, it's all a conspiracy to slowly but surely stop the gay civil rights movement so that soon they start rolling back the rights. And they've already started. They've already started attacking trans people, and the pick-me-gays are just sitting in the sidelines supporting TERFs like this is a fucking party and they're winning. They still hate you, but more on that later. Let's go back to the 2010s, which I feel like were the epitome of gay acceptance in Western countries. We saw a huge uptick in pride celebrations, but not only the celebrations of the queer community, but also capitalism. Corporations jumped at the opportunity to capitalize on Pride Month because they realized that the queer community was a great target, a great consumer target with a lot of buying power. And I don't know why, but in my mind, it was all a coordinated effort to slow us down, to make us think, hey, you guys are cool now. We accept you. Stop. Let's tone down your true queer expression and instead make this all about rainbows and shopping and e-commerce and just celebrating the fight that is finally over. There was a sense of finality in this movement, particularly, after gay marriage was legalized in the United States, and at that point, most European countries had already done that. It's almost like we felt collectively, it's done. The work is done. And when I say collectively, obviously a lot of people continued fighting and continue fighting to this day. Activism is never dead and we are never truly safe. But generally, Pride Month, I think, became more about which corporation is going to change their logo into a rainbow version. And it became kind of a running joke, a running gag in the queer community. But it was still good. Pride Month was still the month where queer creators were making a lot more money. Advertising was going bananas. And then you look at this year and it's like a desert. And that's what you call performative activism, performative allyship. These brands were never really bothered with the LGBTQ plus community. They were just doing that for brownie points. So much so that as soon as government showed some resistance to the movement and applied some pushback to the community, brands were quick to jump on that because to them, what matters is profit. And if it's not marketable anymore to be gay, then you simply don't matter anymore. And that's fine. I feel like as a collective, we were expecting that sooner rather than later, companies were going to stop doing this. Queer people thought it was exploitative, straight people thought it was annoying, and organizations, I guess, realized that It's no longer popular to respect people's identities and sexual orientations. It's more so popular to attack people based on their looks and call them groomers for no reason. So the 2010s felt like everyone was telling us, hey, this month is for you to celebrate, for you to party, for you to be appreciative of the country that you live in, the country that will protect you and protect your rights as long as you stop talking about it. Because as we saw, as soon as the far right started rising and people started expressing their discontent online a little bit more, it didn't take much for the rights to start rolling back and for the public opinion to suddenly start turning on queer people. Now, this, of course, is more in the online spaces. I think the real world is not necessarily following what a bunch of crazy people on Twitter say, but it's enough to get legislation actually implemented and for policies to be rolled back. And the pick-me gays are the ones that piss me off because they are the ones who thought, hey, the fight is over. You know, we can now get married. We can now adopt kids. We can walk down the street and not be called anymore or have stones thrown at us. So it's all good. We're just going to assimilate, integrate completely into society, and call it a day. And those are the people that are happy to climb the ladder and then kick it on their way up. Trans people, drag queens, queers, freaks, people that stood out from the crowd are the ones who told straight people, hey, we're here. And they're the ones who said, we're not going anywhere. And then the white cis gays just joined the fight years later to get laid. And decades later, they make a movie where they take all the credit, rewriting history to manufacture passiveness. And I honestly don't think there's anything that we can say to pygmy gays to make them realize that this fight is not just the fight of trans people, it's the fight for freedom of expression. And that affects everyone. Gender affirming care exists mostly thanks to them and is now being used mostly by cis people, but you don't see them complaining about that in the news because you simply can't demonize an entire cisgender population. It's easier to turn to the trans people and call them groomers and gross and mutilating their own bodies. Add a couple of billionaires with nothing to do in their free time other than attack minorities into the mix, and you get a perfect storm of it's their fault that our life is shit right now. It's not the billionaires. It's not the struggle for power. It's not the wars happening right now. It's not the government's manufacturing consent for us to bomb innocent people. It's trans people. Trans people are why your prices are so high, salaries are so low, healthcare is super expensive. It's the constant peddling of culture wars that truly distract you from the real evil, the real problem in the world. And that's billionaires, the ones that control the world, that hoard all the wealth, and that make you think that it's your neighbor's fault that you don't have enough to pay your bills and eat. The Stonewall Riots 1969 happened at the Stonewall Inn. It was this bar slash club. It was quite sleazy. And it was where the queers gathered. And police at the time were really targeting queer people because we had to wear a minimum amount of clothing items at all times that corresponded to our sex assigned at birth. So if you were born a male, you'd have to have, I think it was 3 pieces of male clothing on you at all times to identify you as a man. And if you were assigned female at birth, then you'd have to do the same for women. And all the trans, non-binary folk and drag queens obviously stood out the most because they were gender bending with the way they dressed and the way they acted. And so police, they had quotas to fill and they were constantly raiding these bars. They were targeting queer people. They were being violent for no reason other than homophobia, transphobia, general bigotry for queers. Until one day they had enough. They rioted against the police, threw bricks. There was a lot of commotion. No one died. But that was the birth of the modern day gay civil rights movement. That's when it all started moving towards progressiveness. The Stonewall movie itself, historically speaking, is very inaccurate, right? The main character is a white gay man who moves from Kansas to New York City after getting kicked out of his parents' house, and he is the big leader of the resistance. He's the one who kickstarts the revolution. He is the one that gives all of these oppressed people a voice. The problem is, this is all bullshit. At the time, there was a lot of backlash, especially when the trailer came out. There was not enough diversity on screen, particularly given the historical context that people know of the Stonewall Riots. And there was a lot of backlash at the time. And Jeremy Irvine, for example, he's the main actor who plays Danny, came out in support of the movie and said, no, actually, if you watch the movie, there is a lot of diversity on screen. We did try to include as many colors of the rainbow as possible in our story. And the director, Roland Emmerich, said that he didn't just make a movie for gay people. He also had to make a movie for straight people. Here's that mass appeal that people have to constantly consider when they make a movie. But he also said that he wants to see himself in his stories a little bit, and he is a white gay man. Therefore, the main character is a white gay man. ironically played by a British actor. That'll never be not funny when British actors play historical American figures. Oh wait, this is a made up character, so who cares? But I think they completely missed the point when the backlash happened. I don't think this was about the movie being a box ticking exercise or including every single ethnicity and gender expression in the film. It was more so about historical context and historical accuracy. Instead of getting a semi-accurate representation of the Stonewall Riots, we get a coming-of-age story that is really, really mediocre when you look at it. So ignoring the historical context and how it butchers queer history, the movie itself is quite shit. As I said, it follows Danny, an all-American white boy from Kansas who's kicked out of his house for being gay. And he moves to New York City, befriends a group of queer people, mostly homeless sex workers struggling to get by, but they maintain joy in their lives, because that's what queer people do. No matter how much the world throws at us, we like to put a smile on and dance and just have fun and party. Because if you're gonna die, you might as well die happy. As a movie isolated from the Stonewall Riots themselves, the movie is quite bad. First of all, there's really no character development for anyone other than Danny, and even Danny doesn't really go through a character arc that intense. It all feels very weak and poorly planned, poorly written, poorly acted. No offense to Jeremy, I'm sure he's a lovely actor in other films, but in this film, he was quite terrible. Like, objectively speaking, it was a bad performance.
I guess I need my stuff.
You sure about
Yeah,
that?
I'm sure. I can't sit in the park like you all day watching the world go by, can I?
Look, I'm sorry.
No, you're right. He's all talk. And talk is cheap. You know, maybe you'll figure that out one day.
Damn, don't go. Where you going?
I don't know, Ray.
And maybe it's because he's a heterosexual in real life. Who knows? This gay for pay stuff is quite tricky. But you look at other characters that we meet in the film, and they never get any backstory and enough that tells us who they are. The movie never invests in anyone other than this white man. The most we see is Ray/Ramona and Trevor. Ray Ramona is more or less the leader of this queer group that Danny befriends, and it's never clear the gender identity of Ray/Ramona. In my understanding, it's a non-binary individual that dresses in a feminine way but still presents as male mostly. But I actually transcribed the script of this film because after watching it twice, I was like, I don't think they said the word trans or transgender one time in the entire film. So I transcribed it, and lo and behold, they do not say trans or transgender a single time in a movie about the Stonewall Riots. That is crazy. Like, that is crazy. I'm not asking you to make the main character a trans person, but when you're making a queer story set during the Stonewall Riots and you refuse to even acknowledge a different gender identity than cisgender, when you refuse to even say the word, they say they say they say gay, they say lesbian, they don't even say trans. They don't even say the actual, it's quite shocking. And this is where I think the character development lacks. Ray/Ramona is the only member of this group that Danny befriends that we ever see him interact with. Yet we're supposed to believe that this group has taken Danny in, has accepted him as a family member, as an extension of their chosen family. But we never see him actually talk to anyone. We never get any backstory or any of these other kids. Again, the most we get to know is from Ray/Ramona, which could have been an incredible character, but instead they reduce them as someone who's lusting after Danny. Ray is chasing after this white picket fence ending where you can live a heteronormative life in the suburbs, completely integrated in society, assimilated. Ray wants out of this life. Ray has been a sex worker since they were 13 years old. So Ray's been on the streets for like a decade now, at least. And it was a weird choice to make Ray lust after Danny the entire time, but Ray's not the only one, because then there's Trevor. Trevor is this gay rights activist. He's the perfect representation of what a liberal is today. Wants progressiveness, but never wants to fight for it in present time. Always against past unnecessary wars, but never speaks out about the current ones that are happening. Always praising past protests and manifestations and uprisings that led to new systems and more rights, but never supporting the ones happening right now. Trevor is a useless parrot that does the work of capitalism for capitalism, going through things bureaucratically, claiming that violence is never the answer. You always have to be passive and you always have to ask. and you only get rights by asking politely. And if they tell you no, you just gotta shut up and wait. Sorry, that's just how liberal politics work. You ask for it, and if you don't get it, you say thank you, daddy, and you go back to work. Danny eventually sleeps with Trevor and realizes Trevor just uses his politics to sleep with young men willy-nilly. Then he's sex trafficked by the owner of the Stonewall Inn, saved by Ray. And eventually, we get to the third act, which is the beginning of the Stonewall Riots. And it's so funny because they're all outside the bar. They've all been kicked out. Some people have been arrested. The owner of the Stonewall Inn is arrested and handcuffed to Marsha P. Johnson, but then he runs away. So Marsha P. Johnson is not even at the riots when they start. She's used more as like a comedic relief of the entire film, almost like a punching bag of jokes and funny one-liners. They give her zero personality, zero background story, zero substance. They grab all of these different characters that are meant to represent a stereotype of the queer community, and then they shove them into this film and have them be basically stand-ins for people that were there, but never said anything of substance, because our real hero is this white guy. He's our white savior. We got there in the end, huh? We gave it a name. And everyone is angry outside of this bar. Someone grabs a brick ready to throw it, but Danny's like, no, don't do that. Just so he can grab the brick himself and throw it.
No, Trevor! It's the only way! Gay power!
Danny, our all-American Kansas City white boy, is the first one to throw the brick at Stonewall. The kid that 2 weeks ago had never lived on the street. The kid who hasn't had to do sex work for the last 10 years. The kid who hasn't been to jail night in, night out for God knows how long, simply for trying to survive in the streets of New York. Danny, who's had a cushy, privileged life up until this point, is the one who starts the revolution. And I think this is a very key detail in how they're trying to change queer history to manufacture peacefulness, passiveness. I'm gonna be so annoying right now, but bear with, because I have a lot of thoughts on this whole casting of Danny. Because you may think that this was harmless, right? Roland Emmerich just wanted to see himself in this film. He couldn't bear the idea of making a queer film about queer history without including himself. The sinister aspect about this casting is that you can tell that they didn't want to have a black trans woman at the helm of the film, for example, because people won't sympathize as much seeing a black trans woman having to do sex work and being abused by patrons and by police officers and by her tricks, only to start a revolution that revolutionized the gay civil rights movement to this day. Instead, you give the world a figure that they can look up to and that they can relate. This all-white American boy who hasn't done anything wrong. You know, he was in love with a classmate and he was kicked out of his home simply for being gay, for being something that you can't control. It's this image of polite, respectable whiteness that you give to America to symbolize the queer community. And it's like, hey, you know those queers that people taught you to hate? Well, this is who you're hating. A young, respectable man from Kansas who has a full scholarship to study at Columbia University. He's a good kid. He's a good student. He just wants to be a contributing member to society. We shouldn't be arresting him simply for being gay. So you give this white savior narrative that'll make people go, oh, well, maybe they're not so bad after all. You know, maybe they do have a point when they ask people to treat them respectfully. And it's this trend that then started building on top of itself, where suddenly the respectable gays are the ones that we should accept and respect. And everyone else, all of the other freaks who dress weird or have blue hair or walk funny or are too flamboyant or want to change genders, those are the problem ones. And that's what I guess fueled this anti-trans sentiment that we're living through right now. An anti-trans sentiment that is also fueled by TERFs. Many of them are gay and lesbian. Many of them are from the community. It's this LGB without the T movement that is so asinine and fucking ridiculous. And this idea of the respectable queer person is very much observable throughout the entire film. First, Danny is the object of affection of everyone. Trevor, the gay rights activist, cannot resist Danny. Ray, the gender-bending queer person whose gender is not really specified because we're making a movie for everyone, not just the gays and the trans, is head over heels over Danny for no reason. They have nothing in common. There is no character development that makes this lust believable other than Danny is a masculine acting white man. He is the closest you can get in the queer community to heteronormativity. And then Ray expresses this desire to leave this life behind and to start fresh in this very heteronormative way with a white picket fence school. Danny goes to work, Ray takes care of the home, becomes a homemaker. And it's this whole fantasy that feels like they're saying, hey, even though we're living in the streets, all we really want is to be in the suburbs and raise kids like y'all, or even raise dogs. Hey, we're not even going to try and raise kids. We just want dogs and a nice house and be contributing members to society. We want to pay taxes. We want to help you guys. We don't want to meddle in your lives. See, we want the same that you guys do. Just that, it's with two men or two women. It's not a man and a woman, and that's fine. And that's fine. And so the sentiment runs through the entire film that Danny is the epitome of what you want to be in the queer community. He is the respectable form of a fag. And then his presence in the film is even more unnecessary because he shows up in New York. He spends about a week or two there. He goes through one or two instances where he has some violence thrown at him, and all of a sudden, he's the one who can't take it any longer. All of a sudden, he's the one willing to throw a break and start a riot with the police in order to push for more gay rights. He is the one that has had enough. It's not this other huge crowd of people that have been struggling for years and years on end. No, they're fine. They're fine with police officers' boots on their necks. It is Danny. He is the face of the revolution because he is a face that people can relate to. He's not a face that someone's going to call a terrorist or a crazy groomer or a He's not wearing feminine clothing. He's not flamboyant. He is acceptable, marketable. And then, of course, Danny's presence and the way the narrative follows him and his love life more so than the actual riots sanitizes the story and makes this more than gay rights. It's actually about this one man's wanting to live a normal life. And the movie spends more time criticizing the ways in which queer people have had to survive under the oppressive force of the police and governments than it does villainizing the oppressive force of the government and of the police. It spends more time criticizing how the community had to cope with the difficulties of the time than it does actually criticizing the people that made it difficult for them to exist. The story is more interested, again, in presenting this white male as the revolutionary force of the civil gay rights movement than it is exploring how the police and governments and laws were being taken advantage of just to target queer people for no reason other than they dressed weird. So that's whitewashing. You remove all of the relevant elements to a historically relevant story and you make it about whiteness. And you get Stonewall 2015. And you may even say, hey, not every movie needs to be historically accurate, and he didn't mean any harm by it. But see, this is what happens because we constantly see them exploiting trans stories to make money, whenever they cast a cisgender actor in a trans role, and then they go on to win Oscars and make a shit ton of money, and everyone praises these actors for how brave they were to portray these characters. And I'm like, it's not brave, it's selfish. It's uninformed, and it's ignorant. Jared Leto, so sorry. I did not see your performance because what the fuck? Eddie Redmayne eventually apologized for his involvement in The Danish Girl, but the damage is done. He won the Oscar, and now we're stuck with his face as the face of the best trans performance in cinema history, played by this dude. The constant trans erasure, paired with other elements such as, for example, the Bud Light campaign they did with Dylan Mulvaney and J.K. Rowling suddenly waking up and thinking that trans women are humanity's biggest enemy, have all contributed to the rise in anti-trans sentiment. The world always needs a scapegoat whenever it's going through difficulties, and I think that we're going through a very historically relevant moment in time right now. We're on the brink of another world war. When we said never again, that was the widest thing people ever said. Economically, we're all capitalism really is skinning us all alive. So it's not enough that we're about to go into war. we also have to cope with the fact that we're gonna go into war broke, and we're gonna come out of it probably dead and broke. So governments, politicians, corporations, they find a scapegoat for you to focus on so you don't actually revolt against the real problem. The real problem are billionaires. The scapegoat are trans people, the minority of minorities. And what pisses me off even more is that they do all of this, they start rolling back the rights, they start targeting these minorities, but then, once the genocide starts, it's like, actually, it's time to do pinkwashing. Pinkwashing, for those of you who don't know, is the term used for when supposed allies use LGBTQ plus rights to improve their image or to conceal harmful actions. And I think the best example that we have of that right now is the pinkwashing of the Gaza genocide. They tell you that queers for Palestine are stupid because if you were queer in Palestine, they would throw you off of roofs. You wouldn't be able to be who you are in Palestine. They would kill you. They're so homophobic and so transphobic. They're religious fundamentalists. We are fighting for freedom of the modern Western world. And that's bullshit because it pisses me off so much because I don't know who had the idea to use queer people as a justification for war crimes. People who say that queers for Palestine are stupid have clearly never understood the gay civil rights movement, the queer rights movement. They've never understood queer activism. Queer activism was never just about getting gay marriage legalized and moving on with our lives. Queer activism was the fight for freedom of expression, freedom to be who you are with who you want to be, consensually, of course. So whoever thought that claiming Palestine is homophobic, therefore we are entitled to bombing them, is ridiculous. Because guess what? My hometown, where I grew up, was really homophobic. It felt impossible to survive in that environment, so much so that I spent a better part of my adolescence trying actively to leave my hometown, sail to better places, and I eventually did, because if I hadn't, I would have 100% killed myself, or I would have probably been bullied to death. Now, am I advocating for the government to suddenly bomb my hometown? Hey, some of them are homophobic, some of them made my life difficult. Does that mean that they deserve to be bombed? So why are we applying that logic to Palestine? But also, it's very convenient that they only bring up LGBTQ plus rights when it comes time to justify war crimes, because guess what? You're criticizing their non-acceptance of queer people, yet you keep rolling back our rights in your own country. You keep attacking our rights, you keep calling queer people groomers and but then you call on us to support your genocidal actions because all of a sudden you're pro-queer, you're pro-gay, you're pro-trans. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that allows gay people to exist freely without beheading you or without arresting you or without stoning you to death. The only true democracy in the region. We are the bringers of truth and of peace. And it's like that lie isn't sticking with anyone anymore. I'm not saying that religious fundamentalist countries aren't homophobic or transphobic or unsafe for queer people. I'm saying that using that as an excuse to bomb them is stupid. First of all, there's a lot of queer people there. And if you really truly care about queer people, then you should care about queers in Palestine, not just criticizing queers for Palestine. But that's more brain capacity than you're used to employing, and I'm talking about Zionists here. So they mobilize these Zionist queer people where they, again, pinkwash the out of war crimes, and luckily the community ain't stupid. Luckily the online spaces aren't a true reflection of the real world, and luckily I think we all see it and we're all aware, and luckily more and more people are starting to talk about it. You don't even have to be an activist, you don't have to dedicate your entire life talking about these things online. I think that talking to your close circles of friends and family is more than enough, because if everyone does that, then you create all of these small hotspots of progressiveness and common sense, and you spread that idea so that people can wake up and realize that they are lying to you, and they're using the LGBTQ plus community alongside others to justify genocide, and that should never happen. Once it touched pride, capitalism it up, like it everything it touches up. So movies like Stonewall, we shouldn't even be talking about them, but I wanted to, because I hate this film, and I hate everyone who did it, and everyone who was in it, and everyone who's ever tried to defend it, and everyone who's refused to see the writing on the wall. This was a coordinated effort. They're doing everything in their power to make it so that gays and lesbians are okay. because they're not really changing their bodies, and we've gone through the grooming allegations and everything, and now that gays and lesbians are like so integrated into society, it wouldn't make a lot of sense to go after them straight away. So the best way is to go after the ones you probably never even met in the first place. The trans, the ones that make up less than 1% of the population, the ones that truly just genuinely want to live happily, normally in their own lives, and they use scapegoats and individuals to paint a bad picture of an entire community, but they refuse to do that with priests, which is weird. So they find a weird trans person, and all of a sudden they're all the same, they're all groomers, they're all dangerous, but then one priest sexually assaults 50,000 kids, and all of a sudden it's just that one man. It's not the entire church, it's not all priests, it's just that one person. It's funny how they love to generalize things when it comes to the freaks. But when it comes to one of them, it's always just a disturbed person who lost their way along the way. And that's annoying. Stonewall 2015. Hate crime. And I think that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this video, make sure to leave it a like down below, subscribe to my channel, comment down below, what did you hate the most about Stonewall 2015? Also follow me on my socials, they're all linked down below, and share this video. And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, stay stupid, and stay stuttering. Bye, guys.